welcome to another edition of our Sleepy 8 podcast. The lovely Calgary Petroleum Club once again. I want to thank all the viewers. Make sure you hit subscribe on that little button there on the YouTube channel. Also listen to our audio on the YouTube. That's where we're on. We're also on Spotify. We'll follow us on Instagram, and we have a new Facebook page that Devin set up. So thank you very much, Devin. And I want to introduce our guest today. It is Naomi Grattan. She is from the Lougheed House National Historic Site. And we're very happy today to talk about the Lougheed space and what it means to Métis. So just maybe introduce yourself, where you're from or where you grew up, or just sort of your travels maybe to get here.
How long do we have, Lawrence? It's a long and winding road. My name's Naomi, and I'm a settler and moved to Calgary about 10 years ago. My parents are English and moved to Ottawa, which is Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory, in the 1970s. And I grew up in Ottawa and have worked in museums and culture for the better part of 20 years now, doing lots of construction projects and rebuilding projects. Worked on the Canadian War Museum, worked on a zoo project in the Middle East for a little while, came to Calgary to help build the National Music Centre, which I did for 5 years, taught museum studies for University of Calgary. I'm currently on the board of the Alberta Museums Association. And at the moment, I am the executive director at Lougheed House.
Oh, excellent. I was at a networking event downtown years ago, I think around 2016. No, actually, I was vice president at that time, about 2016. And I was introduced to Joe Lougheed because the person who brought me to sit right next to her, they made us introduce ourselves. So Joe introduced himself to me, and I said, well, I'm Métis Nation vice president at that time. And he goes, whoa, I'm Métis too. And I remember thinking, well, aren't you Peter Lougheed's son, right? So does that make Peter Lougheed a Métis? Turns out it does. And ever since then, me and Joe have sort of been collaborating as much as possible. And now there's a door that's wide open in the Beltline for the Métis to go to, which is the Lougheed House. And now we have successful mixers, we have exhibits. I know that we had one just in 2019. I know that you were a big key part of that in that relationship with the Museum Association too, that we got the funding and we're very happy to talk about, we can talk about that now actually if you want.
Sure.
Maybe about that phase 1 or part 1, part 2. I know it was all that. So.
Yeah, so you're talking about the exhibition that we developed last year. It's called Forgotten and Remembered, and it was it's a 2-part exhibition that we did on the legacy of residential schools. And so the first part was created by the Legacy of Hope Foundation, which is a Métis organization in Ontario, and that tells the story of the Métis experience of residential school in a national context. And we brought it to Lougheed House, and then we thought, what we'd like to do is also tell a more local story. So we worked with Matt Hilterman from the Métis Nation, who's a well-known Métis historian, and developed a kind of sister exhibition that explored the specific experiences of Métis children in Alberta at the industrial schools. And so Matt worked with census data to try and track down families and sort of names of people we know today whose relatives were in the Dunbow residential school.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's excellent. I mean, I remember. Well, I mean, if people look at it, what our Métis culture is, it's jigging, it's music, it's sash wearing, it's beading, all those things. I go through the list, but nobody really sees the more internal stuff or the dark years or those areas that people don't seem to want to talk about too much in the open. Or sometimes we're never ever heard either because people assume that's just a First Nation experience, not a Métis one. But this is probably the first one I've seen where it highlighted that Métis residential school experience, and that was very, very important for us.
Well, I mean, that is, I think, probably a theme of the Métis experience, not to speak for it, but certainly what I've learned is that the nature of kind of being in between, right? And so for a lot of the children who were Métis, they had a different experience than First Nations children in residential schools, which we are now learning a lot more about and people talk more about, but there is a different and I think specific experience for Métis people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we hear stories of, abuse, but then we hear those stories of us encouraging our kids to go there because it was that real colonial style of education that would be our whiter dads would have probably put us in, right? Just like church. But then our Indigenous moms would probably have been against. But sometimes those dads at home had to say, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard to know. But one of the things I think that was interesting about the Lougheed House sort of story and about this exhibition is that, of course, Lady Isabella, Sir James' wife, she was Métis. And so the home has always been a Métis household, a Métis matriarch's household. And, from what I understand, it's her power. It was her social pull that got James his role and his seat in the Senate. And so she had the political power in that family initially, which I think is an interesting fact.
Yeah, I mean, if you go all the way back to like the Hardesty line, were all the chief factors of Hudson's Bay Company. They were the boss. And she definitely grew up in that sort of affluent Métis Red River community. I mean, she even went to a school there for ladies.
She did, yep.
And the school is still there. People can see it. It's part of a tour of Red River. If people go to Winnipeg, you can still see the school. Matilda Davis School. And the Matilda Davis School, they were given the title Belle when she left, right? So sometimes you see Lady Isabella Belle Hardesty, and she has that term Belle. Mm-hmm. It's not because of Isabel. It's because she was a graduate of that school. And then she went to the Wolseley School where she was discriminated against, which is another all-girl college. And she just went and married and knowing the chief factor, knowing Richard Hardesty, who was a senator in Parliament, was her uncle, right? And he was one of the ones that started negotiating with Riel. So she was around all of this, but view from a different side. Our Métis community sometimes forgets that we don't derive from a lot of Riel supporters sometimes. Most of us do, but there were some that stood on the other side too. And they were certainly opposed to his policies and his way of doing things and upsetting the government balance, right?
Well, I mean, that's always a constant in history, right? It's very easy for us to look back and tell simplified stories of the past. But the past is very similar to today in that it's complex, it's political, there are many perspectives, there are often conflicting perspectives. It isn't clear which way we should go or what we should do. It's the same. And so I always, I talk with my team about how the past is what happened, but history is the story we tell about it. And so the way we tell that history and the kinds of histories we, seek to tell should change.
Yeah. And a lot of that is mirroring today's time. And we talk about self-government with the Métis. There are Métis out there that certainly are opposed. I mean, that's just the nature of the balance.
Yep.
But as long as our democracy runs itself properly, then we get to that yes or no, and we get to the support or non-support, right?
Yeah.
But it's nothing really different than what it was back then.
No, humans are the same.
Yeah, that's right.
Human nature is the same. And it's very easy for us to look back. For example, Sir James supported the creation of residential schools. Mm-hmm. And it's very easy for us to look back and judge that support with our values today and our perspective today. And I often think, it's important to try and understand it in the context of his time. Remembering he had a Métis, his wife was Métis, and so his children would have been Métis. And I think always, how are people who are our descendants going to look back on the choices we're making today?
Yeah.
And it's...
Yeah, and the Lougheed family, when we speak to them, they remember the past, of course. They understand it. There's an understanding. But they also know they are accepting of the Métis. They raise our flag there. They open their doors to us to have those discussions in the Beltline at their house again, right?
Yeah.
And to bring possible business leaders there. I think that's what she always did when she was here in living in Calgary.
Yeah.
She was the center of the art scene, the economic piece. She would have these affluent parties where people were bringing economic prosperity here to Calgary.
Yeah.
She was at the center of it.
Yeah, those themes of community service and community building and family values, those values you can trace right back all the way through the Lougheed family legacy. And you still see them today in the way that the Lougheed family works in community and serves community.
That's right.
They're still very much in evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, we're very excited to look to the future in terms of our relationship with Lougheed House. We did sign a memorandum of understanding only a month ago at one of the mixers.
On Solstice.
Yeah, that's right. During Solstice. And we're very happy to do that and to talk about the Lougheed relationship with us and with the Métis Nation of Region 3. So we're very excited to move forward on some initiatives. And is there anything that you may want to mention, maybe coming down the line or anything like that?
We signed our agreement in December, but that in a lot of ways that agreement is sort of after the fact because it speaks to things we already do together, which I think is actually the sign of a good partnership. We host your monthly Métis mixers, lots of music and song and gathering in the house, which is great. We raise the Métis flag every November as part of Métis Week. We have a Métis historian in residence on our team now and hope to expand the work she's able to do with us. Right now we have a video project underway to try and tell the story of the history of the land. So it's sort of going on, all the way back geologic time, and look at sort of the deeper connection that we have to the land and to the site. And we're working with a Métis filmmaker on that project. What else do we have coming? We're doing our summer exhibition this year is going to be looking at the idea of home and working with our community advisory committee to explore home and how we all think about home differently and sort of some of the objects from our collection and from the Lougheed family collection that resonate for people around that idea. And then we're also going to ask people to bring their own objects in and do a bit more of a sort of a jointly curated exploration of the idea with our community.
That sounds awesome. And I hope I get an invite to a lot of those things.
We'll probably invite you, yeah.
Do you see any sort of big challenges at all with the Lougheed House, or is?
I mean, the challenges are only as big as your vision, right? So if you have a big vision, then you equally have big challenges. And certainly we want to grow our impact and our connection with community. And so, so it requires resources to do that. So we're actively chasing those resources. But at the same time, we're still doing everything we can do and still working in community and in partnership where we can. And, Lougheed House we're so fortunate in that we have 2.5, 3 acres of space in the heart of the Beltline. It's a beautiful space. We've got lots of room to do things, and what resources we have, we share. And so, a good idea is a good idea. We don't have to have all of them. So if people in community have ideas of things they want to do with us, we're very open to that.
Good. If anybody lives in Calgary, I would really think if you go back in time in the late 1800s, it goes from Inglewood. If you skip downtown Inglewood through the Beltline, through Stampede grounds, through the Beltline, all the way to where the Lougheed House currently is. was a derivative of the old town of Calgary. And people always assume it was down where downtown is. No, it was on the other side.
On the other side of the tracks.
Yeah, and 9th Avenue was the old North Trail that was there for thousands of years until they built a railway on it and claimed it as their own. But it definitely was there. So you know the CP rail line that went across through that area. But that's kind of what we think of in terms of the real history of Calgary. And then certainly the Francophones that were here in Rolloville, St. Mary's Church, the Grey Nuns. I know Nat Christie Center is being used by the Alberta Ballet, which I used when I was a teenager. Didn't really know that just a few blocks away there was Métis neighborhood, a significant one. So yeah, I've learned all of this because of our relationship with Matt. Matt has brought a lot of this to the focal point. And we look to him for guidance, on a lot of things in terms of what predates even Calgary. So,
yeah, we had, speaking of what predates Calgary, we had a fun experience in the summer. We had a phone call from a community, a store in our community, art store, wanting to know if we would like to have a bison bone for our collection. It's a 6,000-year-old bone. At one time in the 1960s, the store was renovating, and at that time, so they had a construction team digging up their foundations, and they found evidence of bison kill site, dating back to the Paleolithic, in their basement. So they called in the University of Calgary's archaeological team. Team came in. And maybe processes were a little looser in the 1960s, but the team turned around to the owners of this store and said, would you like to have one of these bones for your personal collection? And so this bone has been with the family all these years. And anyway, in the summer, they contacted us and said, would you guys like to have it? You're the closest museum to the site where this bison kill happened, sort of in lower Mount Royal. So,
oh, wow.
So Dawn Wambold, who's our Métis curator in residence, she and I went down to the store one day and picked it up. So we hope to have that on display soon.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
And if the viewers don't know Dawn Pichet, that's her.
Yep.
Her maiden name.
Yeah, her family name. Yep.
Well, the Pichets were certainly amongst the foothills in Banff for years, and certainly they talk about Peachy Lake or Peachy, something like that. That's in the part of that family. They just spelt the name wrong pretty much. But Dawn Wambold, we've had her representing a lot of us, our meetings at the parks, and her dad too, so Richard.
He's a great musician.
Yeah. Well, he was just our past guest, so he didn't play any songs. So, yeah.
Next time.
Yeah.
Next time.
So I guess I have a question that's been with the others, and I know it's kind of not related, but if you won, sort of a substantial amount of money, like $10 million, would you spend it on me or a museum?
So could I retire?
Yeah.
If we had $10 million for Lougheed House, I think there's a number of things we'd want to do. We would. There's lots of things we can do to the site, and there's lots of things we could do in terms of capital improvements and rebuild the carriage house to create some more space to work with. But I think first and foremost, what we'd want to do is expand our capacity for community partnership and doing the work that we're already doing in terms of co-creating exhibits like the one we did last summer with the Métis residential schools. Doing more of that kind of thing, because that's where progressive museum practice is going. It's the idea of storytelling with your community, working on projects that matter to the people in your community. And as is always the way, if you have more resources, you can do more of those things. So
if organizations should be playing the lottery, then you never know.
You never know.
I just want to go back a little bit and talk about the mixers again, because they are actually our highlight for us, which we never expected. We assumed when I first started them that we would get the usual 20, 25 people in and highlighting the businesses. But now we get close to about 85 on the list. We have a waiting list for each one.
Yeah, sorry, our house is small.
Yeah. And then getting accustomed to having music there. And it's like certainly a kitchen party for us.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
The old style kitchen parties.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, they are a lot of fun.
Yeah, we had a at the last, so we do the Métis mixers are the third Wednesday of every month. So the last one we had in January, there was a really lovely moment because the Métis mixers upstairs, music going, people having a good time, and I was having a board meeting in the basement underneath. And all of the board thought, yeah, this is what we wanted. We wanted to have community here in the house, have the house lively, and we can be elsewhere. So it was a great evening.
Because usually you guys are upstairs with us. So.
Usually would be upstairs with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll be upstairs for the next one.
But it felt like we didn't have our parents around. Like we could do what we wanted, but without in reason. But the good thing about what you guys do, the mixers, is you always give tours, or there's tours available of the museum too while the party's going on, right? So we're very grateful to have that relationship with Lougheed House. So with that, I want to thank everybody for viewing us today. And Devin, are we good with time? Looks like it. Yeah, he's giving me the thumbs up.
Okay.
And right on. So I guess we look forward to the future, and please come out to one of the mixers. Thank you. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda Nations, the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta.